Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. This is Francois, your host. I'm here with Roel this morning. Hey Roel, how are you?
Hello, good morning.
Morning. And today we have a special episode, I guess, because we're going to talk about OpenRoaming. And we've talked about OpenRoaming in the past, about a year and a half ago with Jerome Henry from Cisco. But since then, I guess the situation has evolved. And today, with us on the show, we have two special guests to talk about OpenRoaming. First, we have Tiago Rodrigues, CEO at the Wireless Broadband Alliance. Tiago was with us, I guess, a couple of months ago to talk about the WBA, and he's back to talk about OpenRoaming. Hey, Tiago, how are you?
Hello, everyone. All good. Thank you for the invitation, and always a pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you, Tiago. And along with you, we have Matt MacPherson from Cisco. He's a wireless CTO at Cisco, and he's been working behind the scene with you, Tiago, on the OpenRoaming transitions. And we are very happy to have Matt with us on the show this morning as well. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm doing great, and really look forward to the opportunity to chat with you guys about OpenRoaming. I think we've made great progress, and I think the industry is really starting to ramp. So it's good timing and a good opportunity. So I appreciate it.
No problem. I think Roel and I, as engineers, we are also very excited about this technology, and we hope it's gonna break through, and we hope it's gonna be widely used because it's gonna make everyone's life easier. And we'll talk about what OpenRoaming is exactly in a little bit. I'll ask you guys to describe the product or the framework. But before that, I want you to go back a little bit and explain the history of OpenRoaming. So OpenRoaming was developed by Cisco, so by your teams, and I guess a year and a half ago, we started to hear about it from Cisco. They did this event where they presented it. Jerome Henry did a presentation on it. You can find that on YouTube. And then after that, at Mobility Field Day, about a year ago, Matt, you came along and you did a presentation on OpenRoaming. You explained, the framework and everything, how everything was working. And then earlier this year, I think it was March 2020, the WBA decided to take ownership of OpenRoaming, of the framework, in order to, convert it into a standard that could be used by more like everyone, I guess, in the industry. And I guess that's why we wanted to have you guys on the show today to talk about that transition and what does it mean for Cisco, obviously, but also what does it mean for everyone else in the industry. So first, the first question I wanted to ask you guys, maybe Matt, you can take this one. Would you be able to describe what OpenRoaming is?
Sure. So I think a lot of people today are already familiar with the technology known as Passpoint. It's a technology that allows you to automatically connect in a similar fashion. And oftentimes we get asked, what's the difference between OpenRoaming and Passpoint? And to be really direct, OpenRoaming leverages all the capabilities of Passpoint. So what OpenRoaming does is, I think, really accelerate the adoption of Passpoint into a much broader customer set. Because what OpenRoaming is really a federation that runs in the cloud that anybody can join. When I say anybody, what I really mean is any IDP or identity provider. So if you have a SIM, if you have a certificate, if you have a token, if you have any identity database, you can join into OpenRoaming. And that means it's much more open to a broader set of verticals than we've ever had before. As an access network, you can also join. And again, this can be any kind of access network. This can be what you would expect or what's typical in service provider environments, what you'd see in public spaces. This could be a neutral host type environment. This could be a carpeted enterprise. And so what we're doing is we're really opening up the domain of roaming. And what that means is that if you're a member of the OpenRoaming Federation, you can roam with anybody else that's a member of the Federation. And so we knew we needed to do this in the cloud. We knew we needed to make this extremely scalable. We're over 400 million hotspots around the planet today. So we knew we needed to really make this an automatic mechanism. And that's what OpenRoaming is about. We do this abstraction that's called the Federation in the cloud that anybody can join. And that means that any device going into any network can find the authentication company, group, service provider that they need to connect to in order to authenticate into the network using credentials that are already on the device. So if we step back for just a second, OpenRoaming is a way to do secure and auto onboarding with multiple different identity providers in any access network, depending on that access network's policy. That's really what OpenRoaming is in a nutshell.
Yeah, exactly. And if we put it from the standpoint of the user, let's say I'm just typical user. I have my phone with me. If I go to, let's say, the mall, and the mall supports OpenRoaming, and my phone detects it, and the mall support the one of the identity provider that I have on my phone, let's say my I don't know, my Apple ID or whatever. Then I can use my Apple ID to authenticate to the network and connect to the Wi-Fi, and this can be done automatically. So as I walk inside the mall, my phone will automatically connect to the Wi-Fi, to the mall Wi-Fi, and I don't even have to go back to my Wi-Fi settings, find the guest network, go through the captive portal. You know the drill. So it's just an easier way to roam to a Wi-Fi network in a secure manner.
That's absolutely correct. And so we like to talk about it in the framework of it is secure, automatic, and transparent onboarding wherever you go. And a lot of the work that we're doing over at the WBA now is really around policy. What's going to happen as this gets more and more popular is that you're going to have multiple credentials on your device that could actually onboard you into the network. So the question is, which credential do you use under which circumstances? How do you apply that policy? How do you support things like build interactions? Some access networks for Wi-Fi are build interactions. Many are free type interactions. And so we need to make sure that we can address all of those business models while making the experience for the user just completely transparent. In fact, I like your example as you go into the mall. The way OpenRoaming works, you wouldn't even have to take the device out of your pocket. As you walk into the mall, the device would discover the network. The network would advertise its capabilities and what authentication credentials it can take, and your device would just automatically connect to that network without you really having to touch anything. No going into the connection manager, no picking an SSID, no putting in a password in a portal, no going in and putting in a credit card, no putting in an email address. All those things are just completely transparent to the user. You're just connected wherever you go.
That's
exactly.
That's an interesting way to put it. You touched upon this like a little bit earlier. You had mentioned that you can pick any of the credentials that you have. So there's that possibility of using your work credential as long as that IDP is allowed to be used in that location. So for example, using the mall, it could just select your personal email account, right, as your credential to log in, as long as that IDP is available. But if you're at the airport, it could use your work credential. And then if you don't have to put in a credit card, then I don't have to go through the pains of, all right, well, let me pick which plan I need to set up on for Wi-Fi access. Like that would all be automatic as well. Is that kind of the vision?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the way it works in LTE today, or the way it will work as we see these 5G networks go out, in order to do roamed relationships anywhere in the world onto any provider, it takes about somewhere north of 1,000 roaming agreements. And once you have those roaming agreements, you can get on a plane, and anywhere you get off that plane, it'll just automatically connect into that other operator because of that business relationship. And that's what really roaming is. It's business relationship between different access networks using different credentials. And what we're doing with OpenRoaming is we're taking multiple kinds of credentials. So you could use a credential from your work. You could use a credential that sometimes we call it a web-based credential. You mentioned it earlier. It could be a Google ID or an Apple ID, or it could be something like PayPal. All these are databases that contain credentials. It could be your traditional credential, like your SIM or your eSIM. It could be a credential like what an MSO, a mobile service operator, might use, like a certificate. And so by allowing those different types of credentials and allowing those different credentials to be all aggregated through a federated cloud service, that means the business relationships between these can be established. So if you think of roaming as business relationships, and you open the domain of roaming to broader sets and kinds of credentials, that means that you can expand those business relationships. And so instead of just thinking about roaming as operator to operator, now roaming can be operator to enterprise. Roaming can be enterprise to enterprise. And so there's all sorts of new business models that we believe will be built on top of this.
Okay, really interesting. And maybe that's one of the reasons the WBA decided to take over the ownership of OpenRoaming. Maybe, Tiago, you can touch up on that a little bit. Would you be able to explain what was the process of the WBA taking over OpenRoaming and why you guys decided to do so?
Yeah, Francois, I think was a easy decision. I think Cisco developed a big part of the work behind OpenRoaming, as you mentioned. The Cisco team has been working for quite some time on the OpenRoaming technologies and the framework. And it was an easy decision, even for Cisco and the members of WBA, and especially the companies at the board of WBA, that it's time to make OpenRoaming a global standard. And I like to compare OpenRoaming with Visa. So doesn't matter which country I go, if I need to make a payment, I can go to a 5-star hotel or go to a small coffee shop or a small retail shop somewhere, doesn't matter where. If they have Visa, my card will be accepted. And that's exactly the same principle for OpenRoaming. So once the mechanisms and the framework is standardized and everyone follows the same procedures, doesn't matter which type of credential you have, if it's compatible with OpenRoaming, you are connected and you connect. The same with the networks. Doesn't matter if you are a large stadium or if you are a 2 square feet coffee shop. If you are part of OpenRoaming, you follow the different standards and you configure properly your network, you are in business. And then, like Matt said, it's a question of the business model that you want to pursue. So as you can imagine, there is people, and we all saw there is a free access type of network. So I don't care about quality. I just want to provide best effort type of services. Or we can have much more advanced services, for example, in airports where QoS, certain SLAs are agreed between the different partners, and I connect if I have this amount of quality available to my customers, and I even maybe paying some value to have that services. But the critical path is, how can we have a standard that everyone can join, regardless of the size or the business model that they want to pursue? Let's have that standardization in place and make it available to everyone.
And have you seen the industry responding positively to the WBA taking over OpenRoaming? Have you seen like a little bit of a momentum behind it?
A lot every day, to be honest. I will share. Even today I already had 2 different calls. One from a couple of companies from Australia, specifically from the Sydney. They are looking for a solution like OpenRoaming. They said, Tiago, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And I had another call with one of our members, a company that joined recently, that is, I will tell, is Public Roam. They just do free Wi-Fi mainly for municipalities. And they told me, Tiago, this is what we need. My customers, the municipalities, are asking for this, because customers having to log in with a different credential every time that they go to a different Wi-Fi network is a pain. Even ourselves in our lives, imagine we get out of our houses, we go to have a coffee at Starbucks and we need to do something. And then we go to the office, we need to do something different. And then we go have a sandwich with the colleagues, we do something different. And then we go out with our family, we do something different on the mall. And then we go to a different store, we need to do something again. It becomes very painful and very frustrated for everyone. It's time that the Wi-Fi and the industry, and special the public Wi-Fi and the corporate Wi-Fi, we move on. I always say this joke that many times I go to these large multinationals to have a meeting, and suddenly they give me this yellow small paper with whatever number of letters and numbers. Oh, this is your Wi-Fi.
Here's the Wi-Fi password for today.
Come on, you are on the stock exchange. You are one of the biggest companies in the world, and you give me this small piece of paper. I think it's time that we all join forces, and that's what Cisco and the rest of the board of WBA is trying to do. Join forces and try to step up the experience for everyone. Like Matt said, making these networks secure, interoperable, and automatic experience for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And if you travel, you often see these little post-its or pieces of paper that say, here's this quarter's password to the Wi-Fi network, and you know your laptop used to be able to connect automatically, but now it's changed. So then you got a splash screen. And so I really like your analogy of using Visa. You go anywhere, it's supported anywhere. There's nothing that you have to do in order for some organization to accept your credit card. And so does it? And you said you were working with other companies that are saying, hey, this solves a pain point. Do you think that pain point is providing some way to authenticate users on the network? Because when you make this easier, I find that you're going to remove some things from a venue or an organization that wants to have something like a splash page to collect user information. What do people say about that?
Let me put it this way. That's the great part of OpenRoaming, is that you don't need to put away the splash page. Because the experience that we can implement, and Matt can talk on behalf of Cisco more about it, you can have OpenRoaming, and then once you are authenticated, once you are identified by the network, you can have a splash page. And that splash page can be even personalized to you. It can be saying, okay, Roel, Francois, welcome. You are my VIP customer. I have a special deal for you, or a special offer, promotion, whatever we need to share with you.
Or even the GDPR term and use in some countries, right?
Of course. That is part of OpenRoaming. When you get a credential from someone, the entity that is providing you the credential, it must guarantee that follows all the privacy rules in place.
That's already built in? Okay.
Is already built in. So imagine if you get, a credential from an airline, or even from a supermarket chain. When you register, you need to accept the terms and conditions, and you need to agree to share whatever information you need to share. And if you do agree, that's great. So all the privacy issues are guaranteed. Is a must-have on the OpenRoaming.
Yeah, the portal page a little bit. It's interesting because when we talk to a lot of venues, they do often monetize the portal page, or they use it in order to build the database, oftentimes asking for an email address or something like that. When we talk to users really don't like the portal page. I mean, what they really want to do is be connected to the network. I think everybody's had the experience where you're running into the airport and you want to pull up your boarding pass.
Yes.
And your boarding pass, you need to get to the network to be able to do that. And you connect to Wi-Fi, kind of, right? It's half connected. You're connected to Wi-Fi, but you haven't gone to the portal yet, so you don't actually have internet access. And you're trying to pull it up, and you can't get it pulled up, and you're going through the line, and you're walking up to the security person, and what do? You get frustrated and you turn Wi-Fi off, and you go to LTE, which, by the way, does just automatically connect, and you get your boarding pass, and you're on your way. And we don't want to produce that type of behavior. We don't want the portal experience to be so painful that people don't come. They don't literally connect to the Wi-Fi network because of that back pressure, I guess I'll call it. And one of the things in talking to a lot of customers that we've been told over at Cisco is that just onboarding guests, students, visitors, employees, et cetera, onto the network is one of the most difficult things that they just basically have to do. It's a basic function, but it's one of the biggest pain points, because we often see that portals don't behave consistently between different releases of the OS, or even between different manufacturers of devices. And so you get this very inconsistent portal experience, and then you end up having to debug that experience. And so there's this contention between, well, how do I collect data, and how do I onboard users, and how do I make it simple? And that's one of the, I think, the beauties to OpenRoaming is that, it's using credentials that are already there. It's using T's and C's that have already been signed. And so you can just automatically and securely connect into the network. And then once you're in the network, there's lots of ways of reaching that individual that can provide an improved experience. And so, one way I look at a portal is it's a single instance in time. You go through that portal, and you have the ability maybe to show an advertisement. You have an ability to say what's going on in that event during the day, or whatever you want to put on that portal. But once you're logged in, then that portal experience is gone, and it's gone for the duration of your connectivity to that network. There's better ways to reach those users. If you can drive attach, typical public attach is somewhere around 20%. When we do open roaming, what we see is attach goes up to 60, 70, 80+%. If you can attach 2 to 4 times as many people, and if you have an experience that's available in that venue, and these are typically done through applications, then what you can do is you can improve the overall experience for the entire duration of while someone is there, whether that be an event app that tells you where different sessions are, whether that be in a store that tells you what the current deals that are available to you through your loyalty program. Whether you're a guest at school and you're coming in through something like EduRoam, and you want to understand how students are collaborating across universities. There's a lot of different reasons that you would want to do this, and you would want to provide an experience for the entire duration of that connection. So I think this particular area is going to develop dramatically over the coming years as this automatic connectivity is available to you, and you know that you're going to be online.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Also, because if you have more people connecting to your Wi-Fi, you can also have better stats or better analytics if you want to monetize that for business intelligence or any sort of thing you have going on, marketing campaign you have going on. It would be more accurate data if you have more people connecting to the Wi-Fi as well. So I guess that's another way you could sell the solution as well.
Yeah, and you bring analytics, and whenever someone brings up the analytics, I always want to provide a caveat, because people start thinking, oh no, they're going to know everything I do, and there's this privacy concern. One of the beautiful things about OpenRoaming as well is it does allow for anonymous connectivity. So when you sign in with an IDP, or an IDP puts a profile on your device, when you go into a particular access network, you can actually connect anonymously. So in other words, when you provide your ID, you think of like an email address, your email at some realm, whether it be google.com or what. What you can do is provide actually a anonymous ID instead of the actual ID, and you can still use that certificate to securely authenticate. So we wanted to make sure that we address that case as well. So if you're very adamant about privacy and you want to maintain that privacy in certain venues, you can do an anonymous login. Now, if you do that, of course, you may lose some of the benefits of being in the loyalty program of that venue, and you may choose to actually provide your identity because of that loyalty program, because you want the discount, because you do a lot of shopping there, and you know, you want all the benefits of that. So, but the point here is that it's up to the user, and it's up to the access network as to whether or not they provide that type of functionality. So we do have ways of protecting that, and we're building that into the overall framework.
Okay. That's interesting. I wanted to go back to like the adoption of the technology, especially on the vendor side. So last year when I went to Mobility Field Day, we had both Cisco and Aruba talking. And what was a little bit shocking to me or surprising to me is that, you know, Cisco talked about OpenRoaming, and then we went to Aruba the next day and they talk about Passpoint. And I was like, it's too bad that, you know, they cannot agree on the same type of technology that we could just deploy everywhere and use everywhere. Now that OpenRoaming is a standard, right? That's, you know, I guess Cisco is not the owner anymore. Do you get some pushback, some vendors still? I'm talking about Aruba because they came out with this AirPass technology, which is very similar based on Passpoint. Do you see any pushback from some vendors, or do you think that the fact that the WBA took over will help that the adoption of the technology everywhere in the market?
Yeah, my say, every vendor, of course, can choose what technologies to implement, and even as we go through the standards process, every vendor has a choice as to what standards that they're going to implement or how thoroughly they're going to implement them. So it's difficult for me. I mean, maybe Tiago can address this more specifically. Yes. It's difficult for me to say, you know, what some of the competitors are going to do, except that it has been widely accepted by the industry, and as a standard, the value that something like OpenRoaming has is in its mass. So the more access networks that join, the more areas where you can automatically connect, the more IDPs that join, the more business relationships you can have, and the more likely that you'll achieve automatic and secure connectivity. So it really pays in this instance to build that mass. You asked earlier, why did Cisco put this in the WBA? Because we could have just ran this as a competitive offering. That's not what we wanted to do. This is something that's very significant, we think, for the Wi-Fi industry. And by the way, it is expanding even beyond the Wi-Fi industry, but just talking about Wi-Fi, we needed to solve this problem. We knew that it was a pain point of customers, and we needed to do it at scale, and we needed to do it across the board. So we didn't want to do it as a competitive differentiating technology because, again, that value is in that mass. And so we put it in the standard so that anybody could, in fact, implement it. You know, and I'm familiar with AirPass, and I'm familiar with some of the things that of course the competition is doing here. But you know, what I would say is that they are leveraging Passpoint, while OpenRoaming leverages Passpoint too.
Yeah.
So I think that there will be a convergence in these technologies as we go forward as an industry. You know, one of the things that Tiago and I talked quite a bit about was how do we want this to actually go into the industry, and do we want a bunch of different siloed solutions that would only cover a part of the market? And in order to be able to provide the experience everywhere, you'd have to be a member of each of those siloed solutions. And then eventually you would have to aggregate those siloed solutions through some standards process. And doing all of that, you know, letting this just grow organically all over the place, you know, it's a little bit like having a garden that's a bit out of control, right? And, you know, if you just let anything grow there, that's what you're going to get, anything growing. And what we really wanted to do was to plant the flag, you know, provide a North Star that everybody could come to, because it would accelerate solving this problem across the industry and allow us to build mass much faster. So that was the goal. Put it into the WBA. By the way, we're working with the WFA as well. Use the standards that are already out there, accelerate the ability to build mass, and solve this problem over the next couple of years as opposed to the next couple of decades.
Yeah, Matt, let me just add a couple more things. So I will not mention companies individually, apart from Cisco that is here with us today, but I can share that at the board of WBA, this was a consensual decision. So anyone that goes to the website of WBA, you can see the constitution of the board. So companies like Intel, Broadcom, AT&T, Comcast, Deutsche Telekom, they all support it very positively. And when we launched the official communication of OpenRoaming from WBA side, we had more than 40 members of the alliance supporting, and that is public as well. And just to add to that, one of the important components of being a federation is that Matt mentioned earlier that the Wi-Fi world is really, really large. And we all talk about, oh, we have this cellular roaming and everyone, all the service providers, they roam between themselves on the cellular, but they have a very limited scope because there are around 800 companies, mobile operators in the world, maybe 900. So you have a limitation. You know that that's the target. So you can scale your one-on-one relationships and you may have, let's say, 1,000 contracts. But when we talk about Wi-Fi, it's a completely different game. We are talking about millions, not 1,000, it's millions and hundreds of millions. So we need to have this type of approach. We could not have an approach that one-on-one relations will not work because the small coffee shop on our street will not go talk with all these giant and multinational companies. So we need to have a very open framework that it allows anyone, as I said before, regardless of the size, I may join. And I don't need to talk with every single member of the federation. I just join and I put my upfront my conditions, and anyone that matches my conditions, I'm in, and I start some kind of relationship. And that's the beauty of something like OpenRoaming and trying to integrate everyone.
And when we talk about the identity provider side of things, I've seen, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, that some already joined the movement. So eduroam joined OpenRoaming, meaning I'm guessing you'll be able to use your eduroam credentials to authenticate. I've seen city-roam, public roam, any roam. So I guess those things are very good. It means that people are interested in the OpenRoaming. Do you see movement on the IS identity provider side as well? Do you see like maybe other companies reaching out to you to see if they could become an identity provider?
Yeah, we see quite a bit, and it's actually good. The examples that you gave are interesting examples because what they represent is federations in their own right. They already have a business relationship. You take something like eduroam, it's the universities already have a collaboration, and what you're doing then is you're taking some of these existing collaborations and you're combining them together. It reminds me of the beginnings of the internet. You know, we called the internet because there was a lot of different networks out there, whether it be DARPANet or the university network, or there were various non-commercial uses of these big, broad networks. And then what we did is we connected them together and we called it the internet because it was, in fact, moving between these large existing networks. And then it was commercialized. Well, you can think about this as almost the next revolution because what you have here is you have these different groups of credentials and these different groups of business relationships. And as you connect these different groups together, you get this inter-credential network that allows you to solve the identity and roaming problem much more broadly. So as opposed to actually combining the access networks together, what we're doing is we're connecting these databases together that represent sets of credentials. And that's why in the architecture for OpenRoaming, we also include the ability for hubbing players to come in and play. So these guys that already are doing in the 3GPP space, the capabilities around, like a GRX or something like that already represent a set different IPs, and in many cases, those access networks, and help to combine those together with other sets. And so it's just another way to build mass in that cloud-based federation.
Yeah, and also the thing I like about OpenRoaming is if you compare it to, Hotspot 2.0, Passpoint, usually those systems will be based on mobile operator, and they would rely on using your SIM card to do the authentication to the network in order to use Passpoint. And what that would mean is that you would, limit access to those network to devices that would have SIM cards. I think with OpenRoaming, since we opening the door to a broader audience of identity providers, I think it allows also more devices to connect to these networks. I could come in with my tablet. I remember Cisco Live, we'll talk about use cases, but I remember Cisco Live last year, I came in with my tablet because I had a profile, OpenRoaming profile on my tablet. I connected automatically to the network. I didn't need a SIM card or anything else.
Yeah, and then that's perfect because even with EduRoam, I have an EduRoam account, and my IDP ties back to the university. So no matter where I go, as long as EduRoam is accepted there, it connects automatically. I've seen that in a different country where I wanted to look at something, and my phone was automatically connected to EduRoam nearby, and I didn't even know where it was. It was just connected, and that only works if I'm able to authenticate back home. You know what I mean? So you've already brought in a lot of users just by EduRoam joining this movement.
And frankly, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, when we talk to the EduRoam folks, one of the things about universities is universities are usually in or near a town, and these towns, for sports reasons and everything, are very much university towns. And what a lot of these universities wanted to do was to be able to roam out into that town. So when a student or staff or faculty was out in the town, whether they were going to a restaurant or they were going to a show or any public area, that they would be able to use their EduRoam credential to automatically connect to the network. And so you can see here, by doing this federation, you're opening up whole new business possibilities and relationships with different kinds of access networks using common credentials. Exactly. These are all great examples.
And my ideal solution would be if Apple, Google, Samsung, those big guys, join the movement. And then when you purchase a new phone, let's say you go through the setup of new iPhone, they could add a page that says, "Do you want to join OpenRoaming?" And then when you accept, you pretty much accept to use your Apple ID or your Google ID, whatever, to connect to OpenRoaming networks. That would be ideal.
Yeah, we have some good news on that front. Samsung is one of the companies that join OpenRoaming, and Matt, you can share more about it. But that's one great member of the federation.
It's so you kind of read the tea leaves, I'll say, right? Samsung has already announced, and we've done many podcasts and panels with them. And so you take the shrink wrap off, open the box, and when you go through the process of signing into Samsung to transfer your phone profile and everything over from your old phone, that is part of the actual process. And so Samsung ID is up, it's working, and it's available to anybody that wants to turn it on. And then there's probably some, in pretty clear indications on what's going on in some other places, because we've seen companies like Google very active over at the WBA, and one of the areas that they're very active is in fact around OpenRoaming. So, without pre-announcing anything, it's a pretty good indication that these device manufacturers are getting on board.
Yeah, and sharing some more thoughts. So if you believe, let's imagine that Samsung, Apple, Google, Microsoft, these four companies, if they join the federation, suddenly we have a baseline of devices that can be connected that is massive.
Yeah, I mean, they're IDPs on their own, so why not use an account that you already have? You don't have to sign up for anything. You've already done it. So as long as that IDP is enabled on the venue side or the coffee shop, then you would be able to connect to Wi-Fi, no problem.
Yeah, and covers the beauty is that those 4 or 5 companies or 6, whatever, they cover majority of the devices that all of us uses on a daily basis. Our laptop, smartphone, tablet, maybe a camera. It covers all those. That's what we use on 99% of the time. That's what we use.
Especially when we travel. I think OpenRoaming would be awesome when you travel.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk.
Absolutely. I was just going to bring up one other point too, because I said, look, we're approaching 400 million hotspots around the planet. Within the next 3 years, we'll have about over 600, close to 650 million hotspots. We need a way to connect these things together, but at the same time, I would be the first to admit not all Wi-Fi experience is a good experience. And one of the problems that we've had with Wi-Fi is your experience is somewhat governed by the venue that implemented it, and these Wi-Fis do tend to be deployed in a distributed way. And so one of the things, and this is just phenomenal, this is again an area that we're developing on top of and further than Passpoint. So we leverage Passpoint, but we're adding this federated capability for these roam relationships, but we're also adding a capability to do SLA. So wouldn't it be great if you're going to roam into a Wi-Fi network, if before you did that roam, you actually knew what level of service you were going to get on that network? And that becomes a lot of the business relationship as well. Some IDPs don't want to authenticate you into an access network unless it's a good access network. And so there's a lot of work being done on the policy for this and to tier this into different levels on over at the WBA so that you know that you're going to get a good experience when you automatically connect to these networks.
Is that what you're trying to do to, or some of the features you're trying to introduce to persuade the service providers to kind of join the movement as well?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because the way, if you look at the way Wi-Fi offload works today, there's almost always an SLA involved in that. And typically there has to be reporting that's generated to prove that you're providing a quote, carrier class experience. And so if the carriers know they're going to get a good experience when they're going into that offload network, then they're going to be much more likely to take advantage of the additional bandwidth and the better signal strength in many cases as you go indoors that network has to provide. There's always been a little bit of a worry from the IDP side that, hey, if I just start connecting automatically to all of these different networks and it's a bad experience, then I don't have any control anymore over the experience that my paying user is going to get. And so these types of features and capabilities just become really paramount in offering the full service.
I think that's a good segue to talk about kind of the components or the architecture of OpenRoaming, because we did mention that a coffee shop would be able to do this, but in order to provide a good experience, is that going to be something easy for someone who's not technical to set up OpenRoaming? So I guess we could start where, what is the actual architecture of OpenRoaming? What's involved to make this whole, ecosystem of providers and IDPs work?
Yeah, I think the way that Cisco is doing is OpenRoaming is being implemented in our DNA Spaces solution line. And so there's a couple of ways that you could do this. If you're a large organization and you're running Spaces, then what we call it the easy button. You can click a button in the Spaces dashboard, and you can say, I want to join OpenRoaming, and what it'll do is it'll automatically connect you into the federation and push that configuration into your network. The second piece is to do the policy component. And so what we do is we go into a set of wizards that basically say, well, what type of credentials would you like to take? And if all you really want to do in your guest network is to have secure authentication, you can say, well, I'll take any credential. If you want to just be working within a particular vertical, you could say, well, I'll take anything in the education realm, like Eduroam. Or I'll take any credential that's a web-based credential. So they're grouped into different kinds of categories, and you could say, well, I'll take anything within that category. Or if you want to be very specific, you can go in and you can say, well, you know what, I got an agreement with AT&T. I'll take an AT&T credential, and I'll take a Comcast credential, and you can actually specify specifically which ones you're going to take. And if you have a loyalty program, that's where you would specify your own. And not only do you specify those credentials that you'll take, but you can specify the order of preference. So, for example, if you're a retail store and somebody has say you'll take the loyalty program, but you'll also take the SIM, but you'll also take a certificate for your internet provider. What you can say is, hey, if there's a loyalty credential, I want them to come into the loyalty credential so that we can better facilitate that program and their service. And if they're not a loyalty member, then we'll take one of these other credentials. So you can actually be fairly specific, or very specific actually, about this policy. Now, to your point, if you're a coffee shop, then what you could do is you could offer this as a service, and basically you wouldn't have to run a full-blown implementation and backend yourself. You could have a cloud-based service do that for you, and all you'd have to do then is say what credentials that you would like to take, and that would be implemented and through your network. So the idea here is that we wanted to make this really, really simple to join, really simple to participate in, and really simple to apply those policies that are most business meaningful for your access network.
Now, the part where you mention, say, the coffee shop and the cloud service, would that be an example of a broker, like the one that kind of manages that communication between the provider and the identity provider?
That's exactly right. And then what's nice about some of these brokers or these hubbing players is that they'll often layer a bunch of additional services on top of that. For example, you might want to do a billing relationship, and they can handle all the billing for you. And you might want to do some sort of translation service. So say that we're doing a RADSEC AAA authentication, but the database that you're dipping into is just a regular database that maybe does SAML or OAuth. And so these hubbing players can also offer a RADSEC radius translation into OAuth, for example, for doing a dip into the database so that you can be authenticated. And again, all of these types of services make it extremely easy to use any IDP database in its current form with any access network in its current form. And then we go one step further, based on what we were talking about a minute ago as far as SLA. When you sign up, you can sign up and as a certain level service. But to make sure that people provide the level of service that they claim that they're providing, what we do is we pull network analytics, and this has nothing to do with identity or higher up in the stack, just network analytics on what's currently getting through the network and at what rate and what delay characteristic, a few things like that, so that we can determine whether or not you're meeting the level of classification that you chose, because that classification could determine how much you're being paid for offload, for example, in a build case. And so you have to have some way of assuring that you're going to actually get that level of service. So those are the types of things that we're currently working on over at the WBA, and it looks like we're well down the path to solving some of these architectural problems.
Okay.
Yeah, and Matt, one other element that we didn't touch much today, but I think it's quite important as well. So we talked about the traditional type of users, like people like us, so with our devices, but OpenRoaming as well, Francois and Rowell, brings a lot of opportunities for the IoT world. So let's say, machine-to-machine type of traffic that is generated. We can pick up any vertical that needs mobility. For example, a connected vehicle or a connected bicycle. OpenRoaming can help them as well. So I can have, for example, a municipality service of renting bicycles, and if I put some type of device on my bicycle, as the bicycle goes around the city, if it's parked under the coverage of OpenRoaming network, immediately can be connected and information can be shared. And the same with a connected vehicle or any other element that needs mobility. OpenRoaming can even be extended to those type of verticals.
Yeah, that's interesting, because then that company themselves could also act as the broker, right? Not only just a Wi-Fi network provider. Like, to say those bicycles, like I know in San Jose, there's a bicycle stations all over, the public ones. You could attach an access point to that and include OpenRoaming. They could also be the broker, which handles all the the connection to the identity provider. Say you could check out with your OpenRoaming profile. It's all connected with your credit card and all that, and then it could track like where you've been, where you put your bike.
Yeah,
is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the use cases, Roel. Maybe you guys can go over, where you've been able to deploy OpenRoaming in the real world, what type of results you've seen, and maybe talk about some of the testing you're doing right now.
Yeah, I can share that we have been seeing a lot of traction on large retail stores, airports. I see a tremendous trend in cities, and based on some of the early adopters like London and the trial that we did in Barcelona, between the city of Barcelona, the airport in Barcelona, the convention center, train stations. Those initial adopters have been showing a tremendous success. And I recall in one of the GSMA events in US, we got over around 70% of attachment of every single Wi-Fi user on the show. They were using Passpoint and they could connect automatically. And that made a significant improvement on the experience for everyone. So you don't need anymore to type a password or something. You just enter the building and you connect.
And who do they use as their broker? Because I don't imagine, I don't see a lot of these venues being the one to handle like the broker type of system. Like they would just want to connect to the identity provider, right? But you need to go through a broker to do that, or can you just go directly to an identity provider?
In my view, is going to depend a lot on the expertise and the resources that you have on internally. So if you are one, I don't know, hotel chain or university or a retail shop, if you have internally your own expertise to configure a Wi-Fi network, like Matt said, is an easy configuration. Yeah. Many times in some vendors, maybe it's just a click on a box, is made a registration online. But in many cases, the way that I see it is those enterprises, they don't have internally the expertise. So they need to rely on their suppliers. Many times they have outsourcing services with IT companies or someone that is configuring the Cisco gear or Ruckus gear or Aruba gear for them. So they will rely on those companies. And in WBA, we have members, for example, very specialized in providing Wi-Fi to hospitality. So they work and they manage the Wi-Fi network for all these large hotel chains. We have other members that they specialize in cities and municipalities. In fact, they manage the network for those municipalities. And I expect that those ecosystem brokers, they play a very relevant role because many times they are the man in the middle between the network and the identity providers. And they will be the ones that will somehow connect the dots and not expecting that someone on...
They're the ones that make it...
the local coffee shop on my street, the guy is there to sell coffees. He doesn't know how to configure and enter on whatever DNS spaces and try to configure someone.
Yeah, exactly. They're the ones that simplify that setup.
Yeah, he's going to call his IT guy and he's going to say, look, I saw something fantastic, OpenRoaming, I want to join this. Can you come and set it up for me?
Right. Yeah, and I see that as one of the use cases where, let's say, Francois, you take your company and you really want to help others with OpenRoaming, you would be the network provider. You would provide them with the access points, and you would also be the broker. So you have the infrastructure to be the person in between to tie them to the identity provider, configure all of that, and you could do that for all coffee shops in Ontario, for example, right? And that could be one use case where you have partners or even managed service providers that come in and provide the solution to others.
Yeah, and Francois and Rowell, you can even create additional added services. So you can have, for example, special reporting to those facilities. You can say, look, this is the report of the usage on your network. Who is using, how much time they are connected. So that can be statistics that can be very interesting for the network provider.
Yeah, especially some, I know some business here have limited amount of data per month, especially small businesses. That's something that they do here. So they wouldn't want to know if if their guests are using all of their data for the month, or, if they're well below the maximum that they do have. So that, I'm sure that's something people would be interested in. Something before we finish, I know we could talk about this for hours. It's very interesting, but something I wanted to touch upon right before we finish is client support. So obviously, for all of this to work, you need the client to support Passpoint. Do you see maybe in the future OpenRoaming becoming like a mandatory feature for some of the WFA certification programs?
That's a very interesting question, to be honest. For now, definitely Passpoint is, let's say, one of the most important components of the federation. Yeah. We have been talking a lot with Wi-Fi Alliance related with this public Wi-Fi problem that we want to solve somehow, this very fragmented experience that all of us we have, and all networks, they work in isolation. So it's all small islands everywhere. We start to have some conversations, and I like that challenge. If we could almost make OpenRoaming a mandatory issue for the equipment, so it makes very simple anyone to join the federation if they want.
Yeah, I'm talking about that because I've done some work with Passpoint and Hotspot 2.0, and I struggle to find devices that would support it at some point. So I think it would be nice if it just becomes standard. That's just my 2 cents, I guess.
Yeah, I think it would help.
Completely agree.
I think it would help bring the adoption and also the support of, promoting it as well, creating a better adoption of this. Because there's a lot of things we still didn't talk about, and I would definitely invite both of you guys, Tiago and Matt, back on to talk about other pieces of OpenRoaming. I mean, we didn't cover everything in an hour. We didn't talk about in detail about the Cloud Federation, or even offering other services on top of OpenRoaming. We also didn't talk about how certificates would be handled in OpenRoaming and policies as well. So I think there's another discussion that needs to happen, and especially as long as OpenRoaming continues to be developed, that we talk about how all of these pieces fit together.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about this technology, and I hope it's finally gonna take off. Hopefully.
No, definitely it must take off.
Yeah,
it's time that we solve this problem.
Yes.
When I talk about things that I do at Cisco, many times my family or my kids will give me a blank look. But when I tell them that we're working on a technology that automatically connects to Wi-Fi, even my kids get excited about that.
Yeah, it speaks to everyone.
Yeah, my kids would be excited too, because they don't have cellular on their phones. It's Wi-Fi only.
And we didn't even talk about 5G, but maybe OpenRoaming can have a role in 5G as well.
Yeah, that's another really great follow-on subject, because look, why did we do OpenRoaming? Why do we do this federation? It's really about scale. And if you look at what's happening in the world of LTE and 5G we see this shared spectrum, we see this locally licensed spectrum, which means there's going to be a lot of private LTE and 5G networks. Well, when that starts to happen, you need to be able to roam on and off these networks. Guess what? They're going to have the same problem. They're not going to be able to solve roaming with these manual, 1,000, roaming agreements that they do today, because now there could be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even more private networks. So the problem that we saw with OpenRoaming, is it expandable to other arenas? It absolutely is. And in fact, we've been reached out by some of those groups to discuss how it might be applied.
Yes. And OpenRoaming will be there to help them. I guess that's the goal.
Right. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for your time. Maybe we can have another episode to follow or to continue the discussion in the future. If you guys want to know more about OpenRoaming, you can go to openroaming.org, and then you can also go to the WBA website, which is wballiance.com, and you'll find a whole bunch of information on OpenRoaming. You can also search for OpenRoaming on YouTube, and you'll see the presentation from Cisco as well. In the show notes, we'll also put some other useful links on some of the press releases and some of the use cases that we have around OpenRoaming. Thank you very much for listening. Tiago, Matt, thank you very much for your time today and for joining us on the show. And we'll see you guys in the next episode next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Here, and thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.